I think the last few years have been really great for horror fans. In the late 00s and early 2010s, we really only got a handful of good horror films every year. And now we get lots of great titles every year, and a few that I think have the potential to be horror classics, definitely. 2018 was no exception to that. We got a bunch of good movies to scare your pants off last year. But it definitely wasn't all sunshine and murder death. There were some stinkers in the bunch last year, too. Some real garbage fires. So, I'm going to list off the horror movies of 2018 from worst to best, and hopefully, I won't be crucified by a genre full of rabid fans who can never be satisfied. Yay. So starting off with the worst, we have the Cloverfield Paradox. This is an absolute mess. I hate it. The weird thing is I kind of had decent expectations going into it. Not because it was a Cloverfield movie, because honestly, I'm not really a huge fan of the Cloverfield series as a whole. Might get into that in another video, but this movie had a really interesting marketing strategy. For anyone who doesn't know, near the end of the Super Bowl last year, they announced this movie would be live on Netflix to watch immediately after the game. And I initially thought surprise dropping movies could be a really interesting way to market moving forward. I mean, it's been huge in the music industry for the last few years, so I mean, why not films too? Sadly, the marketing was the only thing this movie had going for it. This movie is uniquely dumb, and not like fun slasher movie dumb, just dumb in a really cringy way. This movie commits the horrible sin of trying to explain the first two Cloverfield movies. And actually the entire movie is just a long origin story for what caused the first two movies, and it's a complete mess of narrative mess. Just, oh my god. It creates so many plot holes and it ends up being more confusing than clarifying. And on top of that, it's one of the most generic space horror movies I've ever seen. There's nothing here you haven't seen in the Alien franchise or even Event Horizon for that matter. J.J. Abrams' entire idea for making Cloverfield into a franchise seems to be solely 1. Take a script that has nothing to do with Cloverfield, and 2. Shoehorn Cloverfield into it. And it doesn't work. Stop trying it. 10 Cloverfield Lane was ruined by being turned into a Cloverfield movie, and you're all sheep for liking it. This is a movie about Slender Man, the video game fad of 2012, and this came out in 2018. Why do I need to talk more about this? All of the CGI horror effects from this movie somehow look worse than the original 8 Pages game, which was made by one guy and runs on the Unity engine. Why do I need to talk more about this? They create a backstory for Slender Man, and it's that he's a forest demon that turns kids into trees. Why do I need to talk more about this? So, The Meg. This movie is just painfully boring, honestly. When I first saw the trailer, I was kind of excited, and I was hoping we'd finally get a movie that justifies the existence of this entire godforsaken subgenre that is shark horror. Something that really should have just ended with the first Jaws and never should have become a subgenre at all. And instead it just contributes to my opinion that this entire godforsaken subgenre never should have existed. There's nothing creative about this movie whatsoever. At all. The only part that put any kind of fear in me was the part of the movie before the shark even showed up, when they were just exploring the dark parts of the ocean. And that's just because the ocean creeps me out. It's not the shark, it's those weird fucking crab things. Everything else about this movie you can easily predict 5 minutes before it even happens. None of it's done in a fun way at all. It's all taken way too seriously. Rainn Wilson desperately tries to add any kind of life to the movie that he can, and the painfully unfunny script just will not let him do it. And then he gets eaten. I had to watch this movie in like 30-minute increments because I kept falling asleep. So, when's Sharknado 7 coming out? Insidious, The Last Key. This franchise just needs to die before it's too late. Don't become a Nightmare on Elm Street, Insidious. Just don't do this to me. Please. There's a few interesting things here that land the movie higher than the others on this list. Like, Lin Shaye continues to give an amazing performance as Elise, and is one of my favorite parts of this entire franchise. The main monster's pretty interesting for a little while until they show it way too much near the end and the computer-generatedness really starts to show. Kind of like the movie Mama, if you remember that one. Overall, it's pretty bland though, and I think the franchise has basically just run out of ideas for good scares, character development, and stories. Plus the key thing is kind of weird and lame. Wasn't really feeling that, and that was like the main thing they advertised of this movie. These movies keep doing really well at the box office though, so if I had to guess, it'll just keep getting new installments until people finally get sick of the increasingly lower quality, like every horror franchise before it. Oh my god. The Predator. Oh, look, another franchise that needs to die. At least Insidious had one good sequel though. I don't think the Predator franchise has had a good film since, Predator. Again, there's some interesting stuff here that lands it higher. I like the super predators. They're big and destructive and fun. There's some pretty fun kills too. If you're, if you like watching horror movies for interesting and gory kills, the scene where the Predator just goes ham on the science lab is fun to watch, but overall, it's just not interesting. And the movie tries to be really funny too, which is super out of character for the Predator franchise. I really hate this trend of every movie in the late 2010s needing unnecessary amounts of comic relief now because the MCU did it. This movie is one of the most gratuitous examples of it, and it especially stands out because it's not even really that funny, and it actually ends up creating story problems too. Like when the Predator gives that one guy a thumbs up with a dismembered arm, that's not a real thing. That's not something a Predator would ever do. Stop doing that. Why did you do that? Also, was I the only one hoping that Arnold Schwarzenegger was going to come out of that container in the end scene? I was really disappointed when all we got was an Iron Man suit out of that. Maybe just me, though. The first Purge. So we're stepping out of the movies on the list I'd call bad now and stepping more into movies I'd say are meh. Bringing up the bottom of that is The First Purge, and that's pretty fitting, I think. I wasn't expecting a whole lot out of this movie, considering there's really only one Purge movie in the franchise I like at this point, and yeah. This is alright. There's just not a whole lot going on here that's really unique to the Purge. There's chaos, lots of guns and politics, pretty standard stuff here. It never ceases to disappoint me how these movies set themselves up to be these no-holds-barred murder sprees where every sick fuck can do whatever they want, and it just ends up being a bunch of people killing other people with guns. Like, I want to see interesting anarchy, not just anarchy with gun violence. If I wanted to see anarchy with gun violence, I'd just start going to public school again. And yeah, this movie's no exception to just, anarchy with gun violence, standard Purge stuff. All the violence is really boring. Even Skeletor, who's supposed to be like this badass razor blade in the mouth keeping twisted serial killer, he doesn't really do that much though, aside from stab some people. And he's still probably the most interesting character in the movie with not even that much screen time. The rest of the characters here don't particularly stand out. Like, name one character trait about one character. If you've seen this movie, name one thing about one character besides Skeletor. Anything unique to any of them. That's just, there's nothing there. They're just like blank pages. I'm talking a lot of shit about it, but overall it's not like horrible though. Usually when I write these things, I try to think of things that stand out to me as particularly offensive or particularly great, and with this movie, I can't really think of much for either. It's just kind of forgettable. So, meh. The Nun. I think they just need to stick to making Conjuring movies and quit trying to spin off scary characters from the movies. I knew going into this movie that they need to do something a little more with The Nun than just rely on the initial terror of the character provided in its Conjuring 2 debut. It worked well in that movie for being a mysterious character that we weren't quite sure how it worked in the context of the larger story. All of the uncertainties about it added more fear on top of what was already a really unsettling design for a demon. But we had gone into that movie having never seen that demon before, The Nun. Now we're going into this movie, its solo movie, and the terror's already been had. Just its creepy ass face wasn't going to be enough to drive the scares in this movie, so I knew they had to do something more. I thought the old Romanian church setting was a great step in the right direction. The film was partially shot in an actual Romanian castle that's said to be haunted. You should look that up, it's really interesting, by the way. And I think it shows in the overall atmosphere of the movie, which is definitely chilling. Somehow The Conjuring always manages to use an overabundance of crosses or other biblical imagery like an Annabelle creation to really hair-raising effect. Also, I think everyone is mortified at the idea of being buried alive, so that scene in the movie is definitely a highlight. And where this movie falls apart is definitely in its story, which is sad because that's what makes the two Conjuring films so strong as horror movies, is the amazing stories they tell, on top of making me scream and cry like a little bitch. And this movie just doesn't have that. What it does have is a scene where the literal blood of Jesus Christ is spit on a demon to prevent a crack in the earth from becoming a portal to hell that would end the earth as we know it. So there's that. Also, if you have the ability to just put someone underground in like a split second, why would you not just do that to everyone that you don't like? That's like a real OP move to have and only just use once. So falling in the very middle of this list and at the very end of the worst section video is Strangers Pray at Night. Personally, I love The Strangers, the original movie, but I didn't think the story lent itself much to having a sequel that wouldn't feel kind of forced. And yeah, this felt kind of forced. I mean, it's understandable that the Strangers would have continued on their murder spree after the events of the first movie, but come on. You could have done something new with them. And it's just kind of more of the same as far as the Strangers themselves go. They show up and they want to kill people just because. Nothing more is developed about them whatsoever. And then they all die. So there goes any further sequel potential. I hope. They managed to do some cool stuff with it though. For me, the pool scene honestly stands out as one of the best horror scenes of the year. And it's one of the major reasons why this movie lands at the top of the mess section and not, you know, lower in the bad section. And while most gun kills are pretty boring and a really lazy way to kill people in horror movies, like I mentioned in the Purge thing, something about the abruptness and destruction of shotguns makes them a really unique exception in most movies, and this one especially. Overall though, don't expect much in the form of interesting plot or characters, and there's not much to differentiate it from the original Strangers, so there you go. So there you go. That's the bottom 8 of my worst to best horror movies of 2018. I will cover the top 8 in the next video. And yeah, like I said earlier in this video, the top half of this list was like the mess section for me. So if you really like The Strangers Pray at Night or The Nun or whatever, don't go thinking that I was, you know, trash talking and saying it was one of the worst. Just kind of middle ground for me. Just like the bottom half of the next list is kind of middle ground above average. You know what I mean? So there we go. Thank you.